Hello, everybody. I'm Stuart Volko here for Into the Impossible for the University of California, San Diego. This is an Innovators Edition. What makes a startup company survive and succeed? How did Silicon Valley become the mecca for tech startups? Can the success of Silicon Valley be intentionally replicated? My guest today, Greg Horowitt, has answers to these questions and deeper insights into the innovation and value creation process. Greg is the Director of Innovation Design at the University of California, San Diego in the Office of Innovation and Commercialization. He's the Chief Evangelist and co-founder of T2 Venture Creation, a consultancy. He is a Kauffman Fellow, and he is the co-founder of the famous Global Connect Entrepreneur Network. I've personally had the pleasure of taking Greg's UC San Diego extension course on entrepreneurship twice. And it's a great experience, and it's essential for people contemplating starting a company. Greg is an accomplished entrepreneur and investor, so he's got firsthand experience what it takes to succeed. But what I really like about Greg is his intellect and his analytical approach to the process and the methods and the psychology of innovation and value creation, and what it really takes to create an ecosystem for fostering innovation, whether it's at the level of an institution or a whole government. Greg's best-selling book, The Rainforest, goes into that in detail, which we're going to talk about. And we'll also talk about his new upcoming book, which gets more into the psychology of creating innovative teams and leadership to create value and solve problems. Thanks for listening. Rate, review, and share.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Into the Impossible. And we are about to interview and have a good discussion with Greg Horowitt. Greg is the Director of Innovation at the University of California, San Diego, and the Managing Director for T2 Ventures. And he has written a book called The Rainforest, which we'll talk about, and we'll also talk about an upcoming book. And Greg, it's good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So first, there's a lot to dig into. We're not going to get a chance to give away everything in the book because it's vast in its concepts and its details. Well, let's just start at the beginning. Why do you think that you can actually teach or create a startup ecosystem? I know that's why you wrote the book, because you sort of set down your theories and philosophies and methodologies. But what made you think you could do this? And what gave you the final, impetus to write the book?
One is that what we were observing and what other people were writing about, we felt were in conflict with one another, that a lot of researchers had talked about this concept of innovation clusters, these communities that just had this dense, rich, asset accumulation, and that if you just had all these things in really close proximity, then innovation would just naturally happen. And what we realized is that you could not make innovation happen, but you could only increase the chances that it happened, and that ultimately innovation was a human-centric process, and it was only because human beings did something and chose to do something that it even came to being. So that's why we use this term that bordered on this concept of ecology and ecosystems, because it was the relationship of the human beings with the environment around them, all these rich assets, that allowed that to happen. So we wrote this, one, as a way for us to organize our own thoughts and describe what was different about what we were seeing versus what other people were writing about.
Now, you had a very interesting journey personally to get to that point where you ran companies, you created successful ventures, and then you got into the venture capital world. So maybe you can tell me a little bit more about that and your journey getting to that point?
Well, certainly didn't appear like the typical linear journey that people do in a career. After graduation, I did go into a series of operating and business roles, but were in more traditional bricks and mortar businesses where it was really about pattern recognition and predicting and repeating something. And so just acquiring expertise and kind of climbing up the traditional corporate ladder. But at some point during that journey, it became quite boring to me because as you became closer to mastering something, it became less intellectually exciting about what I was doing. So I was seeking that intellectual stimulation, which is why I decided to make a change. And it was fortunate that I had close colleagues who encouraged me to stretch my wings, go to the Silicon Valley, join the ranks of a startup organization that I ended up becoming the CEO of, and having a fortunate exit for that. But trust me, that was more of a getting lucky than smart kind of thing. Made lots of mistakes along the way, but during that period in the Valley, you could actually do that. And I was then fortunate to go and work for an investment firm, a venture capital firm that had been an investor in our company. And we were able to then make our first investment that I led, and we were able to take that company public and have a nice exit from that, which then gave me the power of choice at that point what to do. And that's when I came back to San Diego, began mentoring startups, getting involved with a local organization called the Connect program, which at that time was still inside of UCSD, helped with the transition outside of UCSD. But at that point, I started Global Connect to do exactly what you were talking about, which is to explore this intellectual curiosity about what I was observing and what other people were doing, and trying to figure out, was this just, was that observation, could it be validated in some way, and what empirical evidence could I kind of draw upon to support those findings?
The rainforest is a metaphor, and you chose that very carefully as in contrast with the plantation. So that's something we can start with at the top. And you think of that as a way of conceptualizing what a successful startup ecosystem looks like, and how it functions. And maybe you could lay out a little bit, first of all, why did you choose a metaphor and how that metaphor works?
Because well, part of it was that in describing these systems, I found that when you try to describe them the traditional way, people would often get lost and be disconnected from what I was trying to describe. You know, of course, the human brain loves pictures and images and visual touch points. And when you can provide those for people, they tend to be able to not just not just learn something, but truly understand it. So it was just a way for me to describe. And plus, I had always used analogies and metaphors. And that particular analogy and metaphor was not a unique thing that I stumbled upon. Folks like Annalise Saxenian at Berkeley had been using that concept of a rainforest and plantation in a different context than I was using it. But I liked the imagery of it. One, the plantation being this very manicured, linear, man-made kind of effort, and the rainforest being this highly natural, messy, serendipitous kind of place.
So in the book, you get into the teaching of not only at the government levels and the university and campus levels, but at the individual level, how you can foster innovation and create an atmosphere of innovation. So how do you teach this? I know you can't actually teach us right now, but you seem to believe that you can teach it. You can teach people to be more innovative.
By giving people experiences, because that's the best way to learn. There's an old expression that if you tell me, I listen. If you teach me, I learn. But if you involve me, I understand. And so we were trying to get to that understanding level where, by not just kind of lecturing at people or giving people these frameworks, but if you could actually give them the experience of doing it, then they would certainly embody the knowledge much more. And the point about the plantation, the rainforest, is that a lot of the agrarian industrial paradigms we created before that were about mankind harnessing nature around us to minimize the number of extraneous variables and basically to kind of bend nature to our will so that we could get the most out of the scarce resources we were trying to work with. Because productivity demands, these yield factors that are all about the efficiency of what we do. And when you have scarce resources that get consumed, we have to be careful. But in contrast, when we looked at these models that we called the plantations that were messy, they were a lot like these knowledge systems that when people get together and have conversations, they both walk away with more than they came in with. And so what we were noticing is that knowledge, as one of those resources, has the ability to multiply, and asymptotically it can actually go to infinity. So we realize that the more we can exchange ideas, the more we can get people together in the right kinds of ways, we actually have a regenerative and renewable resource that actually becomes quite powerful as a tool for economic growth.
What the book really struck me as being is almost a philosophy of how you change people, and that's the important part.
So a few things. One is, yes, it is generally true that what we found is that what we in society try to do is we have certain outcomes that we desire. We want more jobs. We want more startups. We want greater prosperity. We want greater well-being. And the next thing we ask ourselves is, what are the actions necessary to drive those outcomes? And we focus on that dyad. So if we want more startups, perhaps we have to have incubators and venture funds and places of learning so people can learn these skills. But what we were noticing is that there were a lot of places that were doing exactly that. In other words, they were buying these books on innovation in business. They were following them to the letter, and they were not having a lot of success creating an innovation community. And what we had observed in working with a number of regions around the world that were asking us to come in and help them build their ecosystems is that at the heart of it was what people felt internally, what their belief systems were, and what the values that they held. And we realized that innovation as a journey was more closely tied to those beliefs and behaviors and values that people held. And if you looked at those carefully, you could more closely predict which places would have a greater chance of success in making that happen, assuming that that you could bring the other assets to bear as well. So it was like in the book we described this concept of, it's like a wonderful recipe. It's like a wonderful meal you want to prepare. It's not just enough to have great ingredients. You also have to have the right recipe, and that's what that's what we tried to deconstruct. That's what we try to share. And when you say teach, we teach by doing. We believe in the orthopraxy versus the orthodoxy. What we don't believe in setting into action in a community is do as I say. It's really do as I do. And we find that entrepreneurship, particularly when it's tied to innovation, is a journey of role models. We find other people that we want to emulate, that we want to aspire to be like, and we begin mimicking those kinds of behaviors. And when you go into communities, like the Silicon Valley as an example that people use, or even San Diego or other places, you find that you're able to observe lots of people doing these things, paying things forward, which is the giving before getting. You do these things which in many systems seemed a bit backwards. You don't understand why someone would do something when it's not in their immediate best interest to do so, and yet people do it all the time in these innovation communities. But then after you see it come full circle a few times, you begin wanting to mimic and emulate those same behaviors.
You talk about the extra rational motivators.
Precisely, because we think that people are either rational or irrational, but there's a set of motivators that come above that, which we look at, and that's what we really want to create. So when you say teaching, the greatest thing we'd love to do is unlock this level of self-awareness that people begin seeing things in a slightly different way. Because very often the source of inspiration and change is not in completely removing your beliefs or your perspective, but only shifting it sometimes just a little bit. So you can see things with fresh eyes, or you can see things that were always there, but you just hadn't noticed.
You introduced me to two interesting terms that I had never used before. One's called consilience, and then you talked about to me about explicatory discoveries. So the consilience,
adaptive?
yeah, that we talked about a bit. And first, let's talk about this my new vocabulary word, consilience, which I think kind of summarizes some of what you just said of how you create this network like the one behind you, and why you like that background.
Well, the reason is because what I found is that when I was on this journey to understand kind of what was happening within innovation communities, what I found is I was learning more from the non-traditional experts. In other words, I didn't go to people who had studied innovation. I went to evolutionary biologists, social anthropologists, behavioral economists, psychologists. And when I began talking to them, their insights were very much aligning with what I was observing, because they were all these fields of science are all trying to explain the same thing, which is how nature works and our relationship to nature. Um, and so it gave me not only new language, but also these new perspectives that I could grab onto. Because sometimes, for instance, in our work, studying human anatomy and physiology gave me insights in terms of how the body is constructed in terms of flow mechanisms. And we can take those things because we see cities are living, breathing organisms. They actually are. And so the way people and ideas and capital move through a community are the same thing, the same way the way nerve pulses in a body work, or the way blood flows throughout the body, or the way oxygen comes in and goes and CO2 goes out of our bodies. And by studying some of these analogous systems, we get insights into how to better describe kind of what we're doing, but even ways of possibly measuring new things, which historically we haven't been able to measure before.
The end of the book, you sort of get into the human factors that are involved in creating a startup, an effective startup ecosystem, and what helps companies come into existence and thrive. And I think this might foreshadow the book that you're currently working on. So maybe you can talk a little bit about where the last book ended and where you're going next with your new book.
So where the first book was more, I guess you could say, descriptive, where we were describing not only a set of observations, but then tying those to scientific understandings of why those were happening. The reason we chose to specifically use the word ecosystem versus the word clusters is that there was an ecology, a symbiosis between human intention and effort and the environment around it. That just the aggregations of assets and important things that make innovation happen, what we call the ingredients, was certainly not enough to be deterministic of what would happen. That ultimately all innovation was human-centric, and is what human beings actually did with the ideas and the things around them that were informative in terms of what would happen on the outside. So we realized we had to create systems that allowed human beings to exchange ideas, to collaborate and build together, to share the rewards of the artifacts and the value that was created by those artifacts, but also then to listen and learn from the environment around them and take that lesson and be kind of iterative of it, that what we build both at the micro scale but also at the macro scale was we don't build for perfection. We actually build for iteration and evolution, which is the way nature does things. And so we ended the first book with talking really about those observations about what were these human factors, what drove people to do one thing versus another. And then the feedback we were getting from people who were reading the book said, we buy it, we get it, we love it. Now can you help us then navigate those next steps of how now to actually put this into practice? What do we actually do? And what we then saw is that all human beings, both individually and as collectives and even in large systems, have potential to them. And a lot of that potential hasn't yet been manifested. And what we realize is, gee, we need to be able to create mechanisms by which to unlock that potential. So, step one is, how do people identify and come to a shared purpose or a shared understanding? We have all these things around us, but we also tell stories to one another about a future that can be different. That's what we love about entrepreneurs. They share with us their stories about how they're going to build something amazing and different and how they're going to change the world. But then the question is, how do we have that shared understanding that creates two things: relevance, resonance. Relevance is, okay, you're telling me this stuff and I see how it fits into the world, but how does it fit into me and what I do? And resonance is, how do I then feel about that? And so we have to give people places to play, because we feel so much of this is about more of kind of what we did with children. We have to play. How do we give people mechanisms where they can lean into the uncertainty as opposed to merely stay on this side of the uncertainty and just keep asking questions and do analysis, which eventually, particularly with really complex problems, leads to analysis paralysis. We're overwhelmed by stuff and we don't know how to make one choice versus another choice. And so we create both programs and design platforms so that people can lean into the uncertainty. So in areas of things like speculative design. And then as we do things in real time and things don't work out, oh, what do we learn from that thing didn't work out? Can we take some of those lessons and learn how to pivot or how to change, or do we have to reimagine it, but not be afraid of it? And so instead, in addition to the platforms, the programs that we can construct so that people can have this shared sense of play and experimentation in it, on the human operating system side, we also have to give people the tools to help build what we call their cognitive agility as well as their behavioral fitness. Two of the most important things about building the future. The cognitive agility is how to dynamically problem solve, particularly under conditions of extreme uncertainty and ambiguity. When things are constantly changing and moving around you, how do you not just let it overwhelm you and you fall apart? And it's a skill you can develop by putting people in these situations over and over again. And a lot of what we've learned about this has come from groups like how they train special forces in the military. And then the other one is behavioral fitness, because very often when we have to tackle a future problem, particularly a complex problem for which we may not have a lot of patterns or historical understanding of that, it may be novel, like what we're facing right now with COVID-19. We have to understand how we at times have to not only rely on expertise, but how we also tap into our intuition. And that sometimes that then does what we call, it lowers temporarily our behavioral fitness.
At the Clark Center, one of the areas of focus is the study of imagination, what it is and how it works, as well as tools to enhance imagination. One of the things that we ask many of our guests is, can you be trained and learn to have a better imagination? And it's interesting, the answers, because some people are more on the side of it's a talent. And if you have it, you can enhance it. If you don't have it, you're going to be limited. And you're obviously coming down on the side of a lot of these things are very trainable, right? That you can get better at innovating, get better at design thinking, and whether you apply it to entrepreneurship or other things.
So yes and no. I've never liked these descriptions that are binary, that say you're either X or Y. I believe humanity exists on a spectrum. Just like people ask, are entrepreneurs made or born? I said it's an entire spectrum. There are people who express very, very strong tendencies, and so what they need to exploit that tendency is very, very little, whereas other people who may be more in the middle can enhance their capabilities and their understanding. So I believe you can, it's like your genetics. Ultimately, you'll never outrun your genetics. What you can do is optimize them or minimize them in some ways. And so that's what we want to do. First step, how do you help people understand where they are on that spectrum? And then two, as you said, giving them the tools, but then also the experiences to practice those tools. Because behavior is a series of habits, rituals, and practices. So we give people that, which is why play is so important. It lets you practice all this stuff over and over again in a way where the feedback can feel good, and
So,
sometimes not.
you've been successful at being well. You've been successful at a financial services firm. You had a family business. You worked for Berkshire Hathaway, one of the most famous investment firms ever. You were a successful entrepreneur. You've been a successful investor, a successful venture capitalist. So I want to ask you, what's the secret? Or is there a secret? And underneath that question is sort of natural. Is there a natural selection? So is it the idea? Do you have to have the right idea at the right time? Or is it the execution? And, I'm sure it's both, but if you can like distill, what are some of the secrets in other words, as a venture capitalist, you have to divine whether this is going to succeed or not. And you have to
But at the end of the day, you'd love to believe. If you look at the statistics, it's not like anyone is perfect or approaches perfect. In fact, even the very best people, their batting average would never get them on a baseball team. But that said, is some people have developed a human algorithm for using intuition and heuristics, because so much in the space of emergence, in other words, which has yet to really appear or manifest, it's a lot of gut feeling. And part of it for some people is developing that gut instinct, and some people it's trusting that gut instinct and not overriding it, not letting the intellectual part of it. And I do think that while there's no one set of traits that's perfect for everybody, I do believe there's three basic skills that inhabit the most successful entrepreneurs. One is an intellectual curiosity. I believe you have to be naturally curious. If you're not curious, you tend to sit back and accept the status quo. Two is there has to be some form of what I call appreciative inquiry, an ability to ask questions, but the right kinds of questions. And the only way you really get good at that is by initially probably being bad at it, because it's that learning dynamic. And the third is what I've always called active listening, which is not only listening to the words, but what's being said between the words, learning how to pick up micro signals, body language. And when I've spoken to some of the most successful angel investors, the people who often come in before the VCs, it appears that the ones who have done it more successfully than others seem to have a human algorithm in place that focuses a lot on the human aspects of it, the people themselves, rather than just merely the idea. And when we ask ourselves, so what are some of those kind of micro signals? One is you can determine the level of passion and commitment, because one of the researchers who work I followed, Angela Duckworth, has talked about this concept of grit, persistence, stick-to-itiveness, which is different than the single-mindedness and stubbornness. It's the ability to keep after things even when you get pushed back. We find that great entrepreneurs all have that ability, whether it's when social feedback comes back and says, that's not a good idea, you aren't going to be successful, or whether you get setbacks, missing a customer, losing some financing, you have the ability to kind of have this perseverance. The other thing is this cognitive agility matched with behavioral fitness, this dynamic real-time information processing that you never get thrown off by having the ground moving under your feet. And while it's never that you get completely comfortable with the uncertainty, you learn to appreciate it and embrace it in some way, that's a natural condition. And then the next extension of that is that the mistakes or setbacks are never defining. There's a apocryphal quote, given from Churchill that says, success is not final, and failures don't necessarily define us. It's what we do with those. And I really believe that it's mistakes don't define us; they actually refine us. And the ability for people to kind of get that constant feedback loop where they're feeding information back in and they kind of improve on what they do is, I think, more of a determinant factor. And I think you can train a lot of that in with people.
The current crisis is going to cause some form of recession, and there's a lot of culling going on. Do you think this is natural selection at work? Do you think that out of this there's a silver lining that we'll see a flowering of innovation, that will be new kinds of businesses and new entrepreneurs? Are we, for example, the bankruptcy of retailers and the sunsetting of malls, which a lot of people predict was going to happen anyway, has been accelerated. So is that a silver lining? Are we going to see,
It's not so much a silver lining, but the only constant is change. And the thing is to be able to both embrace it, understand it, and figure out. Because what differentiates true entrepreneurs versus others is that where other people just see problems and challenges and obstacles, entrepreneurs see opportunities. And so even with COVID and the outcomes of COVID, people are seeing opportunities within there. Education. We now are going to these hybrid or changed forms of how we educate. People are saying, oh, there's opportunity there. Can we create new kinds of platforms or way of engagement? How do we then learn from those and optimize them? The retail sector, we've been seeing companies developing tools that are enhancing the virtual experiences of shopping beyond what we've currently accepted, which was good enough, and it no longer is good enough. Because so much of this is just enhancing the human experience, and what is will be different. And so, yes, I definitely, again, it's not so much the silver lining, but I tend to be a pragmatic optimist that every challenge brings new opportunity, and it's understanding those new opportunities, and then how do we bring others along with us, whether it's how do we reskill, create new skills, reskill, and upskill people to adapt to some of these new realities, and how we lead in that direction.
Well, that's a good segue to talk about some of the recent live streaming webinars that you've sponsored and organized in your position at UCSD. You had one the other day that I attended, which was on diversity and inclusion in entrepreneurship. And I think you had a few of these in the series. The kickoff one was about the future of education. What have you learned from some of these webinars? We can start with the future of education one, and I think you're going to plan a couple more in the future, and then
a lot more.
And then we can talk about this idea. I was actually a little surprised about the diversity and inclusion one, because I thought that was sort of a given in the university environment, but yet it takes a lot of work and effort to get entrepreneurship to work for everyone.
We do. So the reason we created this is because, one, part of our role is to convene and to have these conversations, but we also realize that it's a great chance for us to listen, particularly in this time where many of us are sitting at home and are changing our work styles, that we have, again, an opportunity. And I saw the opportunity is for us to not only convene a set of conversations, but use it as a chance to learn. What are we learning in real time, given what's happening around us? And then what do we learn with those lessons? How do we turn those lessons into actionable insights and actually things we do tomorrow differently than we are doing today? Which is why we generally bring a diverse set of not only stakeholders, but what we would call people with different perspectives of expertise and practice into the conversation, and say, what is it that we're doing that we potentially should rethink? We're currently doing X, and maybe we need to rethink what we're doing or reimagine what we're doing. There's other things, what aren't we doing that we could be doing? And that could involve things like some new novel practice or emergent practice, things that people are trying elsewhere that go, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Can we use this time to begin experimenting and playing with some of these things, getting some feedback? And it's rarely about these binary decisions, that didn't work or this didn't work. Is this part of this worked, and how do we figure out how we might do more of this? and the parts that aren't working, can we rethink what's not working and make it work better or work differently? So that's why we convened these series of conversations to build on. We started with topics that are of certainly broad but highly relevant relevance to the university population and where we sit within the community. How do we be the optimal community citizen and citizen of the world? But also, are we constantly serving our stakeholders and our shareholders the best we can, which includes the students, but also alumni, other stakeholders of the university, and of course our staff, our researchers, our faculty, and everyone else. So that's why we put this in. The inclusive entrepreneurship, we wanted people to think more broadly, because very often we create these mechanisms to serve entrepreneurs and help them, but we wait for people to approach us, or we wait for people to refer us to people who might have an interesting idea. And what we realized, there was this whole underserved and underrepresented group of entrepreneurs, not only within the university, but within the community. And we're saying, are we really serving our role as a community citizen and in serving them? And if not, how might we serve them better? But also, how do we define these terms better? Because we use the term inclusive, and we all think we know what that means. But what we found in that conversation, in that this conversation of that inclusive, equity, diversity, that sometimes we narrowed the definition. Like, we weren't thinking about, are we really referring to people with alternative lifestyles like LGBTQ? Are we really including people, let's say entrepreneurs over 50? We often think about it in very defined terms, and just by introducing that into the conversation, it changes the very nature of that conversation. So that was very helpful for us. And then we can feed these insights back to the university on things we can be doing or experimenting with that can help us move the university not only forward, but upward.
Well, I'll be putting links to these conversations in the show notes, and also to your excellent UC San Diego Extension course on entrepreneurship, which is open to the community.
Thank you.
Which I've taken a couple times, which embodies a lot of these principles and methods you've been talking about. Since you're at the university and you've had so much experience in the world of technology commercialization and technology transfer, I've worked as a mentor in the National Science Foundation I-Corps program at the Jacobs School of Engineering Institute for the Global Entrepreneur. And you've worked really hard also to help scientists and academics become entrepreneurs. And some of the things we talk about on this show is there enough innovation in academia? Is there a pedagogy that's effective? How does the pedagogy need to change? What can academics, scientists, principal investigators that think they have a great idea, what can they do? What are some first steps? And also I wanted you to talk a little bit about you don't necessarily have to give up your career as an academic or a scientist. Maybe, you end up not being the person that runs your company, but you may help to start it. Can you get into that a little bit?
Well, we can, because early on, when both UCSD and the whole kind of tech innovation field was growing, there weren't enough of tech-based entrepreneurs. And so the divide was that you had people with an expertise of the potential of technology on society and the markets, but not enough business people who could appreciate that. So programs like Connect were formed within San Diego to help be a translator between that, because these were two different languages at the time, the language of business and the language of technology. And we needed to create a mechanism by which to create bilingual or multilingual community citizens. But then as we've developed more entrepreneurs, but primarily serial entrepreneurs, ways of re-engaging them back into the system so that scientists don't necessarily have to leave their positions. They can come into a new business opportunity as a chief technology officer or chief scientific officer, or as an advisor or co-founder. And they can match their abilities with someone who knows how to translate that into a business opportunity. Because one of the kind of places where this breaks down is that as investors, we don't invest in the technology. What we invest in the business opportunity associated with the exploitation of that technology. And that's something that's not often early understood by the technology and inventor, is that they often think that, wow, I've invented this wonderful thing, therefore all we have to do is introduce it to the market and we're all well and good. And we're saying it's not quite that simple, because the balance of value in the market is on the difference between the value creation that you push to the market and the value capture, what we can pull back from the market. And that difference is what the market values. We can call it profitability. We can call it, efficiencies. There are all these things. And so teaching and having that appreciation between the two sides about what it takes, but then forming these cohesive teams. So what an inventor, as you said, can do, there's a number of mechanisms on campus, whether they're incubators, but also we have a series of entrepreneurs in residence on the campus. And these are serial entrepreneurs who are willing to give back their time to people on campus to help people understand how they may translate their idea into a new business, or it may be a licensed technology into a new company, or it may be something that gets embedded into something else as a feature or a benefit of something else. So not everything is meant to be a company. And we help people understand that, which is why we're creating all these education and training programs. And for those people who are technical inventors who want to cross that chasm and do it, we have a lot of support mechanisms, including financial support mechanisms. So programs like AIM, Accelerating Innovations to Market, or the Triton Investment Fund, which is a third-party venture capital fund that sits out the campus, but has an affinity for investing in a lot of UCSD technologies. We've created that. And then there's a lot of community support mechanisms like Connect and Evo Nexus and other programs within the community that will help startups as well. So we're very fortunate in the San Diego community that there are so many willing participants. They're willing to raise all boats. And then it's just a matter that we, as concierge type of people within the campus, can introduce to various people.
Those are some amazing resources that I'll put links to in and show them on screen. So foreshadow, if you can, what's the name of your new book? Have you named it?
Oh, The Religion of Innovation.
Okay.
And the reason we use that, we don't mean it, of course, in the traditional non secular way. We're meaning it that what we have found, again, when we did the description of these new practices in the first book, between these kind of more linear constructed predictable systems we call plantations versus these more unpredictable, a bit chaotic and unwieldy systems we call rainforests, we realized that the center of all these things was people were trying to determine cause and effect relationships. If we did X, could we drive more of Y type of outcomes? So if we want more innovation, can we do X to make it happen? And one conclusion we came to in the first book is you cannot make innovation happen. You can just increase the chances that it happens. So it's not so much, as I describe, about trying to control and squeeze the toothpaste tube as tightly as you can to get all the toothpaste out. Sometimes you have to let go of your grip a little bit in order to get more out of it. And so it's a bit counterintuitive. So what we found is that very often, if you only focus on the action outcome dyad, it's all about a control mechanism that's about predictive between an action and outcome. What we realized is that all actions were informed by our intentions, our attitudes, our motivations, but more importantly, they were all informed by our belief systems. And when we then see places that do a lot of innovation, particularly at a rate much higher than most places do it, we found that what was different was not that they had better incubators or more capital or more skilled workers. We found that the difference was there was a completely different belief system in place. And that belief system started with what we call the social contract. Things like giving before you get, where people would take meetings with you long before they knew what was in it for them. And that this was very, very natural, that that trust became the big currency that people exchanged within these networks, not transactions, that the transactions often came later. And people exchanged trust and considered trust to be the most important things, which is why networks were incredibly important. Not only who was in your network, but the quality of those people in your network, so that you could reach it knowing that no one person embodied all the skills or knowledge to know whether this idea or this business was going to succeed. So it would take literally a whole village to do that. But ultimately, that came down to a belief system. And so the book then deconstructs what exactly are those beliefs? How do you create these new belief systems, particularly when a community or a society already has a belief system that they've held for a long period of time, where there's been certain legacy industries or certain legacy directions that they've taken? How do you begin changing people from one particular mindset and belief to a completely different one that allows them to do something quite different?
Well, when that book comes out, we will have another discussion and to help you get the book release, and we're looking forward to
Thank
that. As a couple of final questions, if you were to put together what we call an ethical will that you wanted to pass down to the next generation, what would you say? What are some of the top level things that you would say that are lessons learned that you would want to pass on?
One of them we touched on just a little while ago, which is give more than you get. Because even though it'll seem like you're at a loss, it's actually quite the opposite. So that's something, again, a bit counterintuitive. Two, don't be afraid to either make mistakes or to take risks. But as we say, when you go hunting, don't go hunting alone. Take other people with you. It's not just about what you do, but whether you can inspire others to do it with you. Particularly as you go into the unknown. Three, think bold and audaciously, because so much of a lot of innovation is about audacious speculation. This idea to think just crazy in some ways, or what others may think a little bit of crazy, but it's really the crazy ones who create all the good stuff. And in time, that craziness doesn't seem so crazy. We don't think about ride sharing now as being crazy. We don't think about social media as being crazy. We don't even think of the internet as being crazy now. But almost assuredly, at the introduction of each one of those ideas, there was a large number of people who thought that those were crazy. Next, trust your instincts. Trust your instincts and learn how to trust those instincts. It may not come naturally, but there's other things to do it, which then is often why you surround yourself with people of that positivity, because innovation is a practice. It's learned often through biomimicking, being around people who are already doing this stuff and who accept it. It's no accident that places like the Silicon Valley have what is called serial persistence. In other words, they continue to thrive over and over again. It's because people completely self-select, and they make the journey to overcome huge geographic and social distance to be there, precisely to be with members of their tribe, to be with people who are crazy and a little bit odd, because it's in that intellectual jazz and that physical jazz that people are doing that they really enjoy it. Now, true, there are some people who only want to play classical music, who want everything prescribed and written out on the music sheet and do just what's shown them. But there's a whole nother people that want that kind of spontaneous and serendipitous kind of interaction, because they get juice, they get excitement from that, which is about a lot of what I do. And so those are just a few of the things that I can suggest that people embrace as part of that.
That was a great list, Greg. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Here's the book. I'll put links to it and show it on screen as well. The Rainforest, for anyone interested in the art of entrepreneurship and how to create a startup ecosystem. it's excellent, and we're going to look forward to your new book, which is a sequel, I suppose, semi-sequel, The Religion of Innovation. There's a lot of great talks that you've given, and some of them are on YouTube for posterity, including your TEDx talk from the San Diego TEDx 2014, which is excellent, which I'll put some links to. And we want to thank you so much for being on Into the Impossible.
Oh, my pleasure.
You have definitely echoed Arthur C. Clarke's, one of his laws, which is any sufficiently advanced technology will look like magic. So believing the audacious and the big is certainly part of that. So I look forward to your next live stream webinar and further conversations.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
If you enjoyed this episode of Into the Impossible, please subscribe, comment, share, rate, and review. For a chance to win a free copy of our most recent guest's newest book, send a screenshot of your review to info@imagine.ucsd.edu. We appreciate hearing from you and are always open to your suggestions for future episodes. For more information, go to imagination.ucsd.edu. Find us on Twitter @ImagineUCSD. Watch us on YouTube, listen on iTunes. Into the Impossible is a production of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination in the Division of Physical Sciences at the University of California, San Diego. Eric Veary, Director. Brian Keating, Co-Director. Patrick Coleman, Associate Director. Produced by Stuart Valco.